The coastal night was shrouded in a dense, unyielding fog that blurred the boundary between sea and sky, a spectral veil that concealed untold secrets beneath its silvery surface. In this isolated town, where the waves whispered ancient lullabies and the wind carried murmurs of long-forgotten legends, there existed a dark tale that bound the living to the fate of the departed. This was the story of the Ferryman, a mysterious figure seen only when the mists grew thick as paper, whose presence foretold doom and despair, and whose spectral form was as much a harbinger of mystery as it was of terror. In the weeks leading up to the events that would forever haunt the town's memory, an unsettling pattern had emerged. Lives were inexplicably torn away from families and friends, vanishing without a trace under the cloak of night. Each disappearance left behind only echoes of desperation and a pervasive sense that some unnatural force was at work. The fearful glances shared by the townsfolk, the rapid pace of hushed conversations in the shadowed alleys, and the silent prayers uttered in corners of darkened rooms were all testaments to the terror that had besieged the community. It was during this time that an outsider, a detective, whose skeptical heart had long been immune to the whispers of superstition, was compelled to probe the mysteries behind these inexplicable vanishings. The detective, a figure defined by a resolute determination and an unwavering quest for the truth, arrived in the coastal town with a mind steeped in reason and an arsenal of logic. The rationality of his thinking clashed with the ethereal nature of the phenomena he encountered. As he walked the fog-laden streets, the rhythmic crashing of the relentless waves against the ancient, salt-stained piers offered him a grim reminder of the inexorable power of nature, a power that could hide within its depths secrets as dark and timeless as the legends whispered among the locals. Every narrow lane and abandoned wharf he passed seemed to murmur the tale of the ferryman. Here, on a midnight tide that brought with it the spectral passenger, villagers recalled an old myth, the figure who navigated the waters in a creaking skiff, ferrying souls across an unseen divide. Yet, the horror lay in the distortion of this legend. Traditionally, this ferryman had been seen as a benign guide for those at the end of their earthly journey. But the disappearance of the living had twisted this narrative into something sinister. Now the specter was blamed for abducting those still clinging to life, a twist that challenged conventional understanding and shook the foundations of collective belief. Tracing the origins of the legend, the detective learned that decades ago, during a time of social upheaval and sorrow, a tragic pact had been forged between the town and a power that dwelled in the depths of the sea, an ancient covenant, inked in the blood of despair, and sealed with the desperation of a community drowning in its own losses, promised protection in times of distress in exchange for a terrible price. Over generations, the pact had been forgotten, its details obscured by the mists of time, until now, when the specter of the ferryman had returned to exact a debt long overdue. As the detective delved deeper into the mystery, he discovered that every whispered account, every somber story recounted by the weathered fishermen at the docks, spoke of eerie similarities: a foreboding boat emerging in the dead of night, a solitary figure cloaked in darkness, silently gliding across the water, and, most disturbingly, the inexplicable vanishing of individuals who had strayed too near the water's edge. The narrative was interwoven with a sense of inevitability, as if the townsfolk were inexorably bound by a fate that they could neither escape nor even fully comprehend. Each landmark along the pier, the ancient wooden planks worn smooth by time, the rusted lanterns that had once guided souls home, seemed to carry within it the restless energy of lives that had been taken too soon. The detective, though a staunch advocate of the rational, began to feel an unsettling tug at the edges of his reason as he pieced together the evidence. Shadows that were cast by the dim glow of streetlights did not seem to obey the laws of physics, dancing and undulating with a life of their own. There was an almost palpable weight to the darkness, a presence that made the air thick with an unspoken promise of danger. Night after night, the detective found himself retracing the steps of those who had vanished. In his quest for answers, he would visit the crumbling remnants of abandoned piers and forgotten docks, where the saline brine of the sea mingled with memories of loss. Here, the whispers of the past blurred with the present, forming a tapestry woven from both myth and harsh reality. With each step, the detective observed that the town itself had transformed. The once warm and inviting cottages now appeared as mere silhouettes against the backdrop of a merciless sea, and the townsfolk's eyes, clouded with enduring fear, reflected the very essence of the darkness that loomed over them. Amid this atmosphere of despair and uncertainty, one particular location haunted the detective's every thought: a weathered boathouse tucked away at the far end of the waterfront. Its weather-beaten door, scarred by the relentless passage of time and the ceaseless assault of water and wind, stood as a silent witness to histories long suppressed and tragedies too painful to recount. Inside this dilapidated structure, relics of a bygone era lay scattered like relics of a cursed treasure trove. Amulets fashioned from sea glass, frayed journals chronicling strange encounters with ephemeral beings, and faded photographs depicting a jovial community, now shrouded in sorrow, suggested that the town had once been vibrant and full of life. The detective's methodical exploration of the boathouse revealed clues that hinted at the existence of secret rituals, ceremonies performed in the dead of night under the guise of desperation, aimed at invoking the entity now known as the Ferryman. These rituals, once thought to have ceased with the changing of the eras, had apparently endured in the hidden recesses of the town's collective memory, waiting for the moment when their grim power would be called upon once again. As the night deepened and the detective's investigation drew him ever closer to the truth, an unmistakable sense of foreboding settled over him. The clear line between the natural and the supernatural grew hazy, and long after his rational mind resisted, he could not ignore the mounting evidence that defied conventional explanation. In a series of increasingly vivid nightmares, the detective was forced to confront images of a spectral boat gliding silently over a churning sea, its helm steered by a gaunt figure, whose eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity. These dreams, imbued with an intensity that paralleled his waking terror, were not mere figments of an overworked mind. They were echoes of a truth that lay hidden beneath layers of old lore, clandestine pacts, a truth that was slowly chipping away at the hard facade of logic that he had long trusted. Through his relentless pursuit, the detective began to piece together a timeline that revealed a cyclical nature to the horrifying events. Every generation, it seemed, had witnessed an eruption of inexplicable disappearances, a stark reminder of the cursed covenant sealed with the forces that dwelled beneath the waters. Each cycle was marked by an uptick in the supernatural occurrences, followed by a period of relative calm, as if the town collectively exhaled after each wave of terror that rolled in from the sea. And yet, as the cycle repeated, so too did the intensity of the dark manifestations, growing ever bolder in their demand for a price to be paid. The town's venerable historical archives, stored in a creaking, dust-laden building at the heart of the settlement, became a trove of forgotten records that further illuminated the depth of the enigma. Detailed accounts of past rituals, personal diaries of victims, and even barely legible inscriptions scrawled on the weathered walls of ancient meeting halls were scrutinized by the detective. Each document he unearthed was another fragment of a larger, more ominous puzzle, a puzzle that defied neat categorization and demanded acceptance of the possibility that sometimes the inexplicable was rooted in truths far older and stranger than any conventional understanding of the world. Progressing through the labyrinth of history and myth, the detective noted that the story of the ferryman was not unique to this town alone. Similar legends were documented along distant shores and in lands where the line between life and death was whispered about with a mix of reverence and dread. However, what set this coastal town apart was the palpable intensity of its connection to the underwater covenant. The townsfolk, whether in sober reflection or in frantic whispers passed between trembling hands, confessed to a profound recognition of the entity, a recognition that was as much a part of their identity as the tides themselves. With each discovery, the detective's internal struggle intensified. His logical mind presented a series of rational explanations, a combination of mass hysteria, folklore amplified by isolation, and the natural occurrence of coincidences. Yet every piece of evidence he encountered, every physical reminder of supernatural intervention, steadily eroded his certainty. The spectral figure in the fog, the whispered legends etched into the very stones of the town's foundation, and the inexplicable pattern of disappearances began to coalesce into a grim reality that defied rationality. In the back of his mind, the detective hesitated between clinging to hard evidence and accepting that some mysteries might be beyond the confines of logic, destined instead to reside in the realm of myth and nightmare. The climax of the detective's investigation unfolded on a bitterly cold night, when the full force of the fog descended upon the coastal town like a suffocating shroud. Under the pale luminescence of a waning moon, the air itself seemed to vibrate with an eerie energy, and the steady rhythm of crashing waves murmured in a steady, haunting cadence. Drawn to the very edge of the dark water, the detective found himself once more standing before the weathered boathouse, a structure that now appeared less a remnant of history and more a portal to the unfathomable. It was in that moment, as the veil between the known and the unknown grew perilously thin, that he perceived a subtle ripple across the water's surface, as though the calm of the tide was disturbed by an unseen force. In that transcendent instant, the detective was confronted by the chilling realization that the boundaries between past and present, myth and reality, could no longer be maintained. The spectral outline of a skiff, low and ominous, floated into view, its form barely discernible amidst the swirling mist, and there, at its helm, was a figure whose presence exuded an indescribable combination of sorrow and malice. A figure who embodied the weight of countless untold stories. The ghostly ferryman was no mere apparition. He was the living embodiment of the pact that the town had once made with forces impervious to time or redemption. His eyes, twin pools of unyielding darkness, conveyed the inevitability of fate and the relentless demand for a price that echoed across the ages. As the detective watched with a blend of awe and abject terror, the spectral vessel advanced slowly toward the shore, each creaking pivot and every soft lurch of its hull serving as a somber reminder of the delicate balance between worlds. In that silent confrontation, the detective felt the full gravity of the covenant that had not only ensnared the town, but also threatened to claim another soul in its merciless cycle. The realization struck him that the path to uncovering the truth was now irrevocably intertwined with forces beyond mortal comprehension, a union of logic and legend, of science and the supernatural, that demanded both acceptance and defiance. In the lingering moments before the inevitable encounter, the elements, the bitter wind, the rolling tide, and the ghostly presence of the ferryman merged into a tableau of inexorable fate. The detective comprehended, with a heavy heart, that his pursuit of truth had drawn him into the very heart of the ancient pact. His fate, like that of so many others before him, was now interlaced with the murky waters of the past and the spectral tides of the present. And as the ghostly skiff neared the shore, the enigmatic figure on its prow seemed to nod in solemn acknowledgement of the unyielding cycle, affirming that in this domain, the price of passage was invariably paid in the currency of life itself. Thus, within the impenetrable fog, and amidst the relentless surge of an ageless tide, the dark covenant revealed its ultimate demand. The detective's journey, which had begun as an exercise in reason and investigation, culminated in a confrontation with the supernatural that transcended the boundaries of mortal understanding. In that fateful encounter, the veil between the natural and the otherworldly was irrevocably torn, leaving behind a legacy of mystery, sorrow, and eternal dread, a legacy embodied by the ferryman, whose shadow continued to loom over the coastal town like an unending requiem for all who dared to cross the threshold between life and the abyss. In the waning moments of the long and harrowing night, the detective's figure, now a part of the dark tapestry woven by the ancient pact, stood as a silent testament to the eternal dance between hope and despair. His resolute quest for truth had led him to the edge of a revelation that defied the confines of reason, proving that sometimes the answers we seek lie not in logic, but in the depths of legends that refuse to fade away. And so, as the first pale rays of dawn began to pierce the gloom, the coastal town remained forever marked by the shadow of the ferryman, a ghostly sentinel whose spectral journey continued to haunt the boundary between darkness and light, forever reminding its inhabitants that every crossing demanded a tribute, and every passage through the fog was a step deeper into the embrace of the unknown.